Today we're gonna read a chapter by Napoleon Hill from the book The Lost Prosperity Secrets of Napoleon Hill. And this chapter is particularly interesting because this chapter is called The Lessons My Failures Have Taught Me. And I think the reason why I chose this chapter for today is because I think when it comes to the law of attraction, we often hear videos being, whether they're true or not, actually it doesn't matter, but we almost always hear videos only in the law of attraction community about all the successes, all the people who have visualized, and after a week or so they have manifested this and that. And there's nothing wrong with this, but as I often say, don't go to those stories with expectations. Go to those stories for inspiration, but without expectation. And what do I mean by this? When you go to the stories and you read these stories and you watch those stories and you listen to those success stories, especially the ones that got success pretty quickly and fast, do not go with the expectations that you will have the same result, because I know we need to have positive expectations, but we need to have positive expectations towards our own goal, our own way. And by that I mean that just because this person did this and had those results in 1 week or 2 weeks doesn't mean that if you do exactly the same thing as this person, you will have the same result in the same time frame. Why? There's so many variables. You don't know exactly the mood the person with, the way he was feeling when he was doing those things, and his past experience, his now experience, his future experience. And there's so many, the people he hang out with, the music he listens to. You don't know. Even though he might give you a detailed instructions and explanation as to how he went about it, doesn't matter. We're all different. We're all unique in this life. We have the same creative power, true, but it doesn't mean that we have the same time frame. Everybody, the only thing that we all can do is plant seeds, and the seed has its own appointed hours, so it doesn't matter. One thing that took a week, and some people might not want to hear this. Some people want to manifest this, who manifested the same thing you want to manifest, might have gotten it in a week. You might get it in a year or even more. And this is the way it is. Every seed has its own appointed hours, and that's why it's important not to compare and do our best to be in control, quote unquote, of our thoughts and of our moods. And it doesn't mean that you have to be 100% accurate all the time. It doesn't mean that because this person got it in a few weeks and they still didn't get it after a few months. It does not matter. It is what it is, and you have to keep your, as Joseph Murphy would say, your joyous expectancy or confident expectancy. So don't worry, it's all good. That being said, before I start, thank you so much for liking, sharing, and subscribing to my videos and hitting that bell button. I really do appreciate it. It helped my channel grow, and I'm super grateful. Thank you so much. Now, let's get into it. The lessons my failures have taught me. I've often heard the expression, if I had my life to live over, I would live it differently. However, I could not truthfully say that I would change anything that has happened in my life if I were living it over. Not that I've made no mistakes, for indeed it seems to me that I have made more mistakes than the average person makes. But out of these mistakes has come an awakening that has brought me real happiness and abundant opportunity to help others find this much sought state of mind. I'm convinced beyond room for doubt that there is a great lesson in every failure, and that so-called failure is absolutely necessary before worthwhile success can be attained. I'm convinced that a part of nature's plan is to throw obstacles in our pathways, just as the trainer lays down rails and hurdles for a horse to jump over while being trained to pace. and that the greatest part of one's education comes not from books or teachers, but from constantly striving to overcome these obstacles. In these chapters, I will do my best to set down for the readers some of the lessons that my failures have taught me. Let us begin with my favorite hobby, namely putting into practice my belief that the only real happiness anyone over experiences comes from helping others to find happiness. It may be a mere coincidence that practically 25 of my 36 years were very unhappy years, and that I began to find happiness the very day I began to help others find it. But I do not believe so. I believe this is more than a coincidence. I believe that it is a strict accordance with the law of the universe. No sowing grief and reaping happiness. My experience has taught me that a person can no more sow a crop of grief and expect to reap a harvest of happiness than they could sow thistles and expect to reap a crop of wheat. Through many years of careful study and analysis, I have learned conclusively that what a person gives comes back increased many times, even down to the finest detail, whether a mere thought or an overt act. Likewise, as I've said, from a material economic standpoint, one of the greatest truths I have learned is that it pays handsomely to render more service and better service than one is paid to render. For just as surely as it is done, it is but a question of time until one is paid for more than one actually does. This practice of throwing one's heart into every task, regardless of the remuneration, will go further toward the achievement of material, monetary success than any other thing I could mention. But this is hardly of less importance than the habit of forgiving and forgetting the wrongs others commit against us. The habit of striking back at those who anger us in a weakness that is bound to degrade and work to the detriment of all practiced it. I'm convinced that no lesson that my life experience has taught me has been more costly than the one I learned by eternally exacting my pound of flesh and feeling it my duty to resent every insult and every injustice. Great leaders curb their anger. I'm thoroughly convinced that one of the greatest lessons a person can learn is that of self-control. One can never exercise any very great amount of influence over others until he or she first learns to exercise control over themselves. It seems to me of particular significance when I stop and consider that most of the world's great leaders have been people slow to anger, and that the greatest of all the leaders down the ages who gave us the great philosophy the world has ever known, as it is laid down in the Golden Rules, was a person of tolerance and self-control. I am convinced that it is a grievous mistake for people to start out with the belief that upon their shoulders rests the burden of reforming the world or of changing the natural order of human conduct. I believe that nature's own plans are working out quite rapidly enough without the interference of those who would presume to try to rush nature or in any way divert her course. Such presumption leads only to argument, contention, and ill feelings. I have learned, to my own satisfaction at least, that a person who agitates and works up ill feeling for any cause whatsoever serves no real reconstructive purpose in life. It pays to boost and construct instead of knocking and tearing down. When I began writing magazine articles, I commenced making use of this principle by devoting my time and editorial pages to that which is constructive and overlooking that which is destructive. Nothing have I ever undertaken in all my 36 years has proved as successful or brought me as much real happiness as my work on this little magazine has done. Almost from the very day that the first edition went on the newsstand, success has crowned my efforts in greater abundance than I had ever hoped for. Not necessarily monetary success, but that higher, finer success which is manifested in the happiness that my magazine articles have helped others to find. I have found from many years of experience that it is a sign of weakness to permit oneself to be influenced against another person on account of some remark made by an enemy of someone who is prejudiced. A person cannot truly claim to possess self-control or the ability to think clearly until he or she learns to form opinions of others not from someone else's viewpoints but from actual knowledge. One bad habit I don't miss, one of the most detrimental and destructive habits I have had to overcome has been that of allowing myself to be influenced against a person by someone who has bias or prejudice. I've learned by having made the same mistake over and over again is that it is a grievous mistake to slander others, either with or without cause. I cannot recall my personal development I have gained from my mistakes that has given me as much real satisfaction as what I have experienced from the knowledge that I had, to some extent, learned to hold my tongue unless I could say something kind of my fellows. I only learned to curb this natural human tendency of picking one's enemy to pieces after I began to understand the law of retaliation, through the operation of which a person is sure to reap what they sow, either by word of mouth or by action. I am by no means master of this evil, but I have at least made a fair start towards conquering it. My experience has taught me that most people are inherently honest, and that those whom we usually call dishonest are victims of circumstances over which they haven't full control. It has been a source of great benefit to me in editing the magazine stories to know that it is natural tendency of people to live up to the reputation others give them. I am convinced that every person should go through that biting, though valuable, experience of having been attacked by the newspaper and losing their fortune, at least once in a lifetime, because it is when calamity overtakes that they learn who are their real friends. The friends stay by the ship while the wannabes make for cover. I've learned, among other interesting bits of knowledge of human nature, that a people can be very accurately judged by the character of those they attract to themselves. That old axiomatic phrase, birds of a feather flock together, is sound philosophy. The law of attraction at work throughout the universe, this law of attraction, as it might be called, continuously attracts things of a like nature. A great detective once told me that this law of attraction was his chief dependence in hunting down criminals and those charged with breaking the law. I've learned that those who aspire to be public servants must be prepared to sacrifice much and withstand abuse and criticism without losing faith in or respect in their fellow man. It is rare indeed to find a person engaged in serving the public whose motives are not questioned by the very people whom his efforts benefit most. The greatest servant the world has ever known not only gained the ill will of many people of his time, an ill will to which a great many of the present age have fallen heir, but he lost his life in the bargain. They nailed him to the cross, pierced his side with a spear, and fiendishly tortured him by spitting in his face while his life slowly ebbed away. He set us a mighty fine example to follow in his last words, which were something like, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." When I feel my blood rushing to my head in anger on account of the wrongs that people do me, I find comfort in the fortitude and the patience with which the great philosopher watched his tormentors as they slowly put him to death for no offense whatsoever, except that of trying to help his fellow men find happiness. My experience has taught me that those who accuse the world of not giving them a chance to succeed in their chosen work, instead of pointing the accusing finger at themselves, seldom find their name in who's whose. A chance to succeed is something every person must go out and create for themselves. Without a certain degree of combativeness, a person is not apt to accomplish very much in this world or acquire anything that other people covet very highly. Without combativeness, people can easily inherit poverty, misery, and failure, but if they get a grip on the opposite to this, they must be prepared to contend for their rights. But note well that I said rights. The only rights we have are those we create in return for service rendered, and it may not be a bad idea to remind ourselves that the nature of those rights will be corresponding exactly to the nature of the service rendered. My experience has taught me that a child can be burdened with a no heavier a load, not visited with a greater curse than that which accompanies the indiscriminate use of wealth. A close analysis of history will show that most of the great servants of the public and of humanity were people who arose from poverty. The test of great wealth. In my opinion, a real test is to give someone unlimited wealth and see what he or she does with it. Wealth that takes away the incentive to engage in constructive, useful work is a curse to those who use it. It is not poverty that a person needs to watch for. It is wealth and the attendant power that wealth creates for good or for evil ends. I consider it very fortunate that I was born in poverty, while in my more mature years I have associated rather closely with people of wealth. Thus, I have had a very fair demonstration of the effect of these two widely separated positions. I know I shall not need to watch myself so very closely as long as the need for life's ordinary necessity confronts me. But if I should gain great wealth, it would be quite essential for me to see that this did not take away the desire to serve my fellow man. My experience has taught me that a normal person can accomplish anything possible through the aid of the human mind. The greatest thing the mind can do is to imagine. The so-called genius is merely a person who has created something definite through imagination and then transformed that picture into reality through action. All this and a little more have I learned during these past 36 years. But the greatest thing I've ever learned is that old truth which the philosophers all down the ages have told us, that happiness is found not in possession but in useful service. This is the truth that we can appreciate only after having discovered it for ourselves. There may be in many ways though through which I could find greater happiness than what I receive in return for the work I devoted to the editing of my magazine, but frankly I have not discovered it, nor do I expect to. The only thing I can think of that would bring me a greater measure of happiness than I already have would be a larger number of people to serve through this little brown-covered messenger of good cheer and enthusiasm. Never heard of Napoleon Hill. I believe the happiest moment of my life was experienced a few years ago while I was making a small purchase in a store in Dallas, Texas. The young man who was waiting on me was a rather sociable, talkative, thinking type of young fellow. He told me all about what was going on in the store, a sort of behind the curtains visit as it were, and wound up by telling me that his store manager had made all of his people very happy that day by promising them a golden rule psychology club and a subscription to one of my magazines with the store's compliment. No, he didn't know who I was. That interested me. Naturally, so I asked him who this Napoleon Hill was, about whom he had been talking. He looked at me with a quizzical expression on his face and replied, "You mean to say you have never heard of Napoleon Hill?" I confessed that the name did sound rather familiar, but I asked the young man what it was that caused his store manager to give each of his employees a year's subscription to my magazine, and he said, "Because 1 month's issue of it has converted one of the grouchiest men we've got into one of the best fellows in this store, and my boss said if it would do that, he wanted all of us to read it." It was not the appeal to my egotistical side that made me happy as I shook hands with the young man and told him who I was, but to that deeper emotional side which is always touched in every human being upon finding that his or her work is bringing happiness to others. This is the sort of happiness that modifies the common human tendency towards selfishness and aids evolution in its works of separating the animal instincts from the human intuition in human beings. I've always argued that people should develop self-confidence and that they should be of good self-advertisement. I'm going to prove that I practice what I preach on this subject by boldly asserting that if I had an audience as great as the one served by the Saturday Evening Post, which I could serve monthly through this, my little magazine, I could accomplish more inside of the text of the next 5 years toward influencing the masses to deal with each other on the golden rule basis than all the other newspaper and magazines combined have done in the last 10 years. The upcoming December issue of the Golden Rule marks the end of my first year. I know it will not be construed as an idle boast when I tell my readers that the seeds we have sown through these pages during these 12 months are beginning to sprout and grow throughout the United States, Canada, and some foreign countries. Some of the greatest philosophers, teachers, preachers, and businessmen of the age have not only pledged us their heavy, hearty, moral support, but they have actually gone out and rounded up subscriptions for us in order to help us foster the spirit of goodwill that we are preaching. My tendency to nitpick. Is it any wonder that your humble editor is happy? There are people who have much more of the worldly wealth to show for the 36 years of experiencing than I have. But I have no fear in challenging all of them to show a greater stock of happiness that I enjoy as a result of my work. Of course, it may be only a meaningless circumstance, but to me it is quite significant that the greatest and deepest happiness I've experienced has come to me ever since I began publishing this magazine. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Yes, it came from the Bible, and it is sound philosophy that always works. And our experience has proved conclusively that it does. The first time the notion ever struck me to own and edit a magazine some 15 years ago, my idea was to jump on everything that was bad and pick to pieces all that I did not like. The gods of fate must have intervened to keep me from starting such an enterprise at that time, because everything that I had learned fully corroborates the philosophy in the above quotation. How to be very happy for the holidays. Permit me to suggest a simple little service that you can render, which ought to and probably would bring you great happiness and at the same time make others happy. During the proper season, go out and buy some holiday and New Year's cards. Write some sentimental little messages on these cards in your own handwriting, and then mail them, not to your friends but to your enemies. Send a card to everyone you have ever disliked and to everyone you believe ever disliked you. Make the message you write on each card suitable for the person you send it to. It will not hurt you to try this. It may do you much good. One thing for sure, it will make you feel that you have been bigger, more broad-minded and sympathetic this holiday season than you were ever before. These days, more than ever, concessions should be made by all of us. We have reasons aplenty for changing our attitudes towards our fellows. This will make the world a better place to live in. You are not satisfied with yourself anyway, and that is a healthy condition, because no normal person is ever fully satisfied. You naturally want to make some change in your environment and in your habits for the future. May it not be possible that you could not do better than to start with a firm determination to cultivate tolerance, sympathy, forgiveness, and a sense of justice toward all your neighbors, those you do not like as well as those you love. May it not be an excellent idea to begin now to cultivate the habit of self-reliance, good cheer, and thoughtfulness for others, knowing, as you surely will know if you stop to think, that these same qualities will reflect themselves in those with whom you come in contact, and they will eventually echo back to you in greatly increased measure. Sans Scrooge packing. We all have been narrow-minded, selfish, and stingy these years gone by. We have fed our minds upon hatred, cynicism, and distrust. We have wished our neighbors ill. We have laughed when they were in trouble. Let us now forget these mistakes we have made in the past, and just once, for one no other reason than to experience, rise above our former selves and be big-hearted and broad-minded. You cannot fill your heart with love and hatred at the same time. These two human emotions make incongenial companions. One or the other usually dominates. Which, may I ask, would you prefer to dominate in your heart? Which do you suppose would ultimately serve you best and raise you to the highest points of achievement? By all means, buy those holiday cards and try the experiment that I have recommended. It will bring a ray of sunshine into your life, and that it will touch every atom of your being and cause it to radiate those qualities that prompt the world to call a person great. True greatness is first manifested in one's own heart. The world never discovers that greatness until individual has discovered it. It may be a long while after you discover that you may have reasoned about petty meanness, jealousy, hatred, and envy before the world discovers it. But one thing is for sure, this discovery will never be made by the world until it has been made by you. When you begin to feel in the bottom of your heart that the great soul dwells within your body, that you have commenced the process of transformation from the old self to the new, it will not be long until others will make the same discovery. You can take the first step in the direction of true greatness by sending out those holiday cards to all you have disliked and all you believe have disliked you. It will require effort on your part to do this. You will have to overcome the damnable quality of stubbornness, but you can do it, and it will be worth doing. I do not know for sure, but I strongly believe that this experience will be worth as much to you as anything that has ever happened in your life. Provided you are not one of those rare souls who have not risen above those negative qualities that stand between most of us and the opportunity to enjoy happiness and the only real success that can come to any human being, namely the chance to bring happiness to others. The biggest truth I have discovered in all my experience is that it pays in both dollars and in sereneness of the mind to learn to forgive and forget that the ingratitude and the unkindness of others. It is a wonderful thing to be able to feel and know deep down in your heart that you have risen above the common human trait of striking back and exacting your pound of flesh for every wrong done to you. Just how wonderful it is to know by trying it. Then try it now. In closing, I will leave you with these thoughts. Who is there to stop you from thoroughly organizing yourself and climbing to the heights in your undertaking you may choose? Who is there with power enough to stop you? If you organize your faculties and directed your efforts to a definite end in an organized manner, if you belong to that great mass called wage-bound, who must be a certain place at a certain hour every day of their lives in order to get the necessary food and clothing for existence, who is there to stop you from organizing your faculties to such an extent that you can eventually take a day off at least? Answer these questions. The answers may lead you out of the wilderness of poverty, failure, into the light of success and plenty. Who knows without trying? And this is the end of this wonderful chapter by the great Napoleon Hill. I don't have much to say because I think Napoleon pretty much said it all, and I said a lot at the beginning of this audio. No matter where you get this piece of content, I appreciate you no matter where you are and no matter what time of the day and wherever in the world you are. I think I would be the first to admit, not reluctantly, not now anymore at least, before I would reluctantly admit it, but envy is such a envy and other negative unwholesome emotions we have towards others are crippling, no more no less. It's such a poison to hold and harbor thoughts and feelings of ill will, hatred, wishing bad towards people. It's just a recipe for disaster and a recipe for disappointment, deception, sadness, depression, and all that bad stuff. I remember when Dyer wrote in one of his books that if you want something for yourself, wish it for someone else. His name Joseph Murphy talks a lot about when we envy others, we prevent the thing we want from happening. Even Neville Goddard said that one of the two things that God dislikes is to eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is the judgment of others. Judgment, generally speaking, but also the judgment of others. And that's what we tend to do. We tend to envy, and fear is what creates all those unwholesome qualities in us every now and then, because we fear that these people threaten our own survival, so to speak, because at the very core, all fear boils down to survival. That's what David Hawkins wrote in his book, Letting Go. All fear boils down to our survival. We're scared. We're scared of being left alone, destitute, agonizing in the cold, And obviously it's a very, very deep-seated subconscious fear, but it is this Darwinian struggle of the fetus that puts us against one another, even in our thoughts, our emotions and stuff like this, because we feel threatened. We feel threatened by others because if they have more, there's less for us, for example. If they do this, why should they do this? Why should they do this to us? Because we feel that we are deserving of better. And maybe we are, maybe we're not. Doesn't matter. As Napoleon Hill said, once we let go of the judgment and once we see the beauty in the world and the beauty in our fellow man and our beauty in ourselves, we can see it in others. And that's also one thing that Stephen Hawking talks a lot about. Also Neville Goddard, and actually in a lot of philosophies, in Buddhism they speak about this too. Once we can forgive others and also ourselves, obviously, we will tend to see more like-minded people, which means that we allow ourselves to see the beauty instead of always looking for the negative. Because if we look for negativity, we'll find negativity. If we look for something positive and wholesome qualities in ourselves and others, we'll see more and more of it. So we need to see this as a prerequisite. And I will finish this by saying and talking about the main concept of this particular chapter is the giving and being of service to others. David Hawking, in his book Letting Go, in his vibrational chart, talks about the level of acceptance, which is a very high level of vibration. Once you reach this stage, you are not so concerned about your needs anymore, because your needs are being met, because you trust in the universe. You know that your needs and what you need and food, clothing will always be provided because you have been trusting in the universe. At this point, you don't care so much about yourself. You care about being in service to others, because being in service to others is what brings you the most happiness. That's why in Buddhist talks, we always tell people to go be of service to others voluntarily, helping the destitute, the poor, the needy, the sick, because it will relieve our own sadness, our depression, by giving towards others. There is a study that showed that people who give a gift often find more happiness than actually receiving a gift. And I think there can be equal happiness in both. But it is interesting and underrated how much giving of ourselves unconditionally, that's very important, can make us happy. In the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu talks about having detachment from outcome, to give ourselves completely to the task and give our whole soul and put it into the task we're doing, and that's giving. And regardless of the outcome, we don't care about the outcome. The outcome is out of our control. And that's the way we should live out. We should live our life giving to this present moment, giving to ourselves, giving to others. I remember the first time I heard Tyler Perry talk about forgiveness. He said that as soon as he started forgiving, when his father passed away, he forgave him for all the wrongdoings, for all the ill will, for all the abuse, for all the physical violence he had done to him. He was so angry, and he had to wait until his father passed away, and he went to his father's tombstone, and he finally mastered the courage and the warmth and the compassion and the understanding and the tolerance to forgive him. And he said that after he had forgiven him, which is letting go, forgiving is not a small thing. Because forgiving, yes, to err is divine, and to err is human, to forgive is divine, sorry. But once we can cultivate this forgiveness and this letting go and this surrendering of this negative emotions, a lot of beautiful things can happen in life. Once we let go of all this negativity, and not to say that they will all vanish at once, but they will progressively vanish. And even if they don't fade completely, you will have the tools to combat them. So I know I digressed, but it is important to give and be of service to others. And I added my own twist on this chapter. I say give to yourself as well, and by giving to yourself is being okay, by surrendering and letting go of the negative emotions. Because once you know how to give to yourself, it will be much easier. When you don't really give to yourself, you won't be able to really give to others. So give to yourself first and foremost. That's not being selfish, that's not being egotistical, that's not being narcissistic, that's being kind and big-hearted, as Napoleon Hill said. So give to yourself unconditionally with kindness, love, and compassion. Then the rest of the world will unfold in a way that is also beautiful, kind, and compassionate towards you and others. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you very soon.